It kind of seems like there's a lot of pressure for companies to keep making great content marketing. Of course, that's hard to do. And like with anything else, there's dozens of approaches, so there's probably not a one-size-fits-all strategy that will definitely work for your brand or company. But I do think REI has one of the most unique approaches to this. So we're going to pull from our archives and an old episode of 3 Clips, another Castos original, to learn more about their approach. The episode is called Audio as a Visual Medium, and it explores the creative process behind the show Camp Monsters. It was published in November of 2021. It was hosted by Jay Acunzo, the creator of the series, and was produced by me. You'll be able to hear that episode in its entirety next. Real quick, before we listen in, I want to let you know about a way to create a private subscription-based podcast. With Castos, you can easily create a private podcast for your membership site, online course, or community. The best part? You can integrate it with the tools you already use through our direct integrations. Learn more at castos.com or click on the link in the show notes.
One of the phrases you hear tossed around in the podcasting industry quite a bit is how audio is a visual medium. I don't know who first brought that into the public eye, but it's probably Ira Glass, both because I've heard him say it, and when you don't know where to attribute a popular quote in podcasting, just attribute it to Ira Glass, and no one's going to ask you for your sources. So sure, Ira Glass made that idea popular. Audio is a visual medium. It's theater of the mind. And I think one of the most powerful pieces of developing the stage, the set design, putting good actors, so to speak, on that stage, one driver of that theater of the mind is your ability to write. But it's such a subtle dance. It's a very interesting craft because it's not the same as writing to be read. You could write lots of books and articles. You could write a lot of email. You can write to be read and be a great writer. And then as soon as you're writing to be heard, especially heard when you're not physically in front of somebody, that is a different game. You might fall flat. And so today, we're definitely going to get into that specific craft really heavily, but I kind of geeked out, I'll just admit, in the entire interview because I have long wanted to talk to this host and this writer, this performer, who develops a show for a brand, which is one of the best podcasts, period, from any source, at creating theater of the mind. Welcome to 3 Clips, where podcasters take us inside their process, a few pieces at a time. I'm Jay Acunzo, and this is a Castos original series. As always, our goal today is to demystify the creative process behind great podcasts and to inspire greater creativity in your work. To help us, today we're going to learn from Weston Davis from the show Camp Monsters. Camp Monsters is actually produced by REI, the brand, the apparel company, REI. And it's created in the tradition of old radio dramas, mixing together elements of fictional storytelling and sound design to create really gripping narratives that can be finished in about 40 minutes or so. The show's current 36 episodes are spread across 3 seasons and feature, quote, stories of impossible encounters with impossible creatures in the wildest corners of North America. In other words, good old-fashioned ghost stories and folktales told around a virtual campfire. They're stories of camp monsters. Oh, that's where they got the name. Okay, anyways, this show is part of the REI Podcast Network. Yes, the show is part of a branded podcast network where the brand itself creates multiple shows. And they're incredible. It's not marketing here. If you're like, oh, a brand, ew, ick. Look, that's my world, okay? First of all, I came out of the content marketing industry. You can do branded content incredibly well. And this show is at the head of that pack. And we want to dive into why that is. Each episode of the show involves a ton of research about the folktale or the creature, about the region it inhabits or supposedly inhabits, and the sound design and the music. Oh my goodness, unbelievable. I mentioned before, but the show is hosted by Weston Davis. He's the writer and host of Camp Monsters, and he teams up with producer Chelsea Davis, his sister, and sound engineer Nick Patry to create what are essentially mini audio dramas. But before we dissect the show that clearly I love, let's first meet Weston Davis. You mentioned before I hit record that you're not really from like a podcasting tradition. It's not historically what you've listened to or created. What was your experience in audio before Camp Monsters?
Oh, I did some commercial work and things like that. Just dabbled in it, really. Most of my background was in theater and a little bit of film work, but mostly in theater. I was a theater guy, so that's really what my background was in.
How'd you get involved in this show?
Well, yeah, I got roped in through the back door, kind of through theater. My full disclosure, my sister works for REI, and she got on this idea of making a podcast about monsters, about camp monsters, about cryptids. And the original concept was just something she was trying to pitch internally. And because of my background in theater, she approached me about just recording a pilot that she could use as kind of a proof of concept. And then they were in touch with a couple different established podcast talents that they were going to use to kind of move this forward. Anyway, she never even ended up playing the pilot for anybody because REI just loved the idea, and they got into negotiations with a couple different people to host, and things bogged down, and it was looking like they weren't going to be able to put it together on the time frame they were hoping to do, just because of conflicts and people not being able to put it together the way they wanted to. And so then she pulls out this pilot that we'd recorded as a one-off, a year prior, which was the Bat Squatch episode, and said, well, hold on, before we scrap the whole thing, we do have this one pilot that we recorded. How about you give it a listen? And it got a really positive response from within REI. So that was my way. And then they called me up and said, hey, what about you hosting? Which isn't something that we had talked about or explored. It was just supposed to be kind of a, like I said, a one-off thing that was just going to never see the light of day, just going to be internal. But turned into something more. I'm glad it did.
I'm glad it did too, because I came out of the marketing industry, specifically content marketing, where, I've tried to push people and organizations and teams towards branded stuff, not feeling like quote unquote branded stuff, just feeling like good stuff. And this show is not shilling products. It's an original series or an original show, which of course improves affinity to the brand. And Chelsea actually came on 3 clips in its early days.
I heard that one. That was a good episode.
Well, all credit to her, because she's very strategic. She understands that there's always a balance, always a dance that you're doing between, we have an existing brand, we do have marketing goals, but we want to make something worthy of the audience investing their serious attention. And I think some people may hear this show, and if you don't know it's from REI, it's not from a media company. It's not an independent creator who owns the show. It's a brand. And some people might be surprised by that. Now that you've done it for so long, what do you think it is about a company like REI that puts them in a good position to make an original show like this, where so many brands, it sort of comes across as hollow?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about their commitment. They're the kind of brand and the kind of company that really has a commitment to quality. And so I think that was where, Chelsea had success and we had success selling them on this idea of, hey, we have a good thing here that people are interested in, that, is a good thing in its own right. And you can put, your name on it, and this can be something that you really own and run with. And it'll be a good representation of you out there in this, very quickly growing marketplace. You're going to make a name for yourself. You're going to make a mark by producing something good that doesn't necessarily have to, follow, like you said, expectations when it comes to what a branded podcast is going to look like, and they're the kind of organization that's just interested in quality and are willing to follow that out and to kind of chase that. And so it really opened a lot of doors for us and allowed us to make what we wanted to make. And like you said, I think come out with something stronger because of it.
The show features 40-ish minutes of storytelling. It's all narrated by you. You're the lone voice, and there's a lot of sound design, a lot of music that makes it really immersive. Can you just paint a picture? When someone hears it, they're going to hear you. Obviously, there's more people working on the show. So what's the makeup of the team supporting each episode that makes these things come alive?
We've got a lot of great people at REI, first of all, that are helping us come up with the monsters and the markets, the places we want to locate those monsters in, or where those monsters are located. And then we can kind of build it from there. And as I write the scripts, I'm going back and forth with different people at REI and at our sponsor Yeti and things like that to kind of, just see how the story is developing and see what we can do there. So we've got a lot of good input at that level, and that's kind of across multiple teams. And then, of course, our senior producer Chelsea Davis is right there with it at every step of the process, just kind of herding it along and helping it, making it happen. And then Nick Patry is just a one-man band. He's our engineer, and he's a wizard with sound. And so once I get done recording it, he gets a hold of it and cleans up all my mistakes and adds all the really cool, what really makes it the show, I think. Otherwise just a guy talking. But when you get a lot of the world that Nick puts onto it, it really adds something. And then once we have the finished product, it goes kind of back to the teams and back to Chelsea and all our producers and people in the marketing structure at REI and stuff. And then they kind of give it the thumbs up or have a couple changes, that sort of thing. We do a few re-records and then we turn it loose. So it's a team effort for sure. And we've got a lot of good people supporting it.
So the episode that we're going to pull all of our clips from today is the same one, and I understand it's one of your favorites.
My favorite one this season. Yeah,
I am so excited. That was a total coincidence. Our producer Stuart selected this episode, so I want to ask you after we hear a clip why it's your favorite, but we'll hold on that for a moment. It's called Colossal Claude, which is about a fictitious encounter between a sailor and a mythical sea creature known as. And any guesses, my listener friend? Colossal Claude. It's the 5th episode of season 3, and it was published on October 7th, 2021. Really quick, Wes, can you just describe the monster? Like, what is this monster? Just plant a visual for our listeners before we hear the clip.
Sure. It is your classic sea monster, long neck, large head. I describe it kind of like a evil-looking horse, but with a great big gaping jaw and black teeth. And all that terrifying stuff that you'd expect from a sea monster. What it looks like below the water, hey, nobody knows. But, you see that big arcing neck coming out of the water and that giant head, and it's terrifying enough.
So in this first clip, you, quote unquote, the sailor, are aboard a ship called the Olympus on a stormy night in 1875 because it's a podcast, so you can time travel. It's totally a thing. And then suddenly, off the starboard bow of the ship, I think we got the directions correct.
There you go.
The ship slams into an object, or, as we discover, a creature. So let's hear the clip.
And then you realize what he must have said, and your hands freeze on the knot you're untying. The word he said was Claude, and you know what that means. It means that the ship will surely sink. All sailors on this coast know Claude, Colossal Claude, Claude, the Columbia River creature. Claude is a sea serpent, a massive monster, a legend, and a harbinger of doom. Sailors say he has a head like a dragon in the old books, perched on the end of a long, curving neck that juts from the water. He lurks in the sea, near the Columbia River's treacherous mouth, devouring sea lions and dolphins and sailors trying to swim away from dying vessels. And he's only ever seen by those aboard ships that are destined for the bottom. Some say he lures ships to wreck, others that he merely appears when one is about to. But all agree that once Claude is spotted, no vessel can escape its fate.
Isn't that great? Oh man, I love listening to Nick's magic when he gets in there and really just cuts loose. It's so much fun. Man, it's so fun.
Oh wow! So yeah, take us into that detail, into that production, a piece of the production process rather, with Nick. What is his role? What is he doing? How are you working together?
Well, in the old days, I should say, in the pre-pandemic days, it was great. We go into a studio that he had on Capitol Hill, which is right in downtown Seattle, and we'd record these episodes all as a team. Multiple people in the room, and we're kind of working it live and making little adjustments and things and going back. And so it was a really great group atmosphere that we had initially. Now with the pandemic, that's all changed. Now I'm recording it in in an old root cellar in my basement, and then sending the audio file over to Nick, and he's working on it. But we still, if anything, I think we've gotten better at turning him loose to kind of put all these pieces together. The first season there was a little bit of hesitation about putting in too much sound and too much ambiance, because it felt like we wanted to stick with just kind of a campfire sound. So you go back to season 1 and it's heavy on the campfire, it's light on everything else. But Nick really worked on us and was always showing us different things that he could do. And this season especially, we've really let him go with it. And I think all those great just sounds that he works in the background are so much fun. So really, I record the vocals, I turn it over to him, and then he'll come back with this orchestra of haunting sounds that he's put over the back of it. Tinkling chimes, or it'll just be something as simple as one low note that'll start to grow in the background, and he really has a feel for it. So there's not a whole lot that I have to do, or that we really have to do as a team. We'll tell him, a little more of this, a little less of that. He put too many owls into one episode. We said, whoa, you got to go easy on the owls there. But, but yeah, so it's really easy on our part. We just let Nick go, and he makes magic. But it's so great. I always get such a kick out of hearing the finished product.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's like having a whole band backing you up. It's a blast.
I'm glad we're starting here, because I wanted to start with this sort of non-obvious to some people element of the show. I think the obvious part is, the monster, the selection of that monster, the scripting, of course. It's such it's a written show. So we're definitely going to dive into writing for audio, because I love that nuance and that craft. But I did want to start with the non-obvious to some again, which is the sound design and the structure of that. Chelsea, who I mentioned before, Chelsea Davis, when I've seen her talk publicly about the show, one of the things that she's mentioned is that what makes it work, the sound of this all, it is restraint. Like you said, maybe too many owls in an episode, and here and there you might have to tack someone like Nick back. But for the most part, he seems to strike that right balance between not enough and too much. Why is restraint something that matters to actually convey that feeling? Why does that nail it? It's sort of like a Goldilocks approach.
Yeah, well, restraint, I think, is the key in anything like this. It's having those really, the creativity of the whole thing comes from the parameters that we set, and say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do, and this is all we're going to do. I think a podcast like this, especially where you're trying to play on suspense and terror, it has a lot more to do with what you don't describe and what you don't see. Really, the challenge for me is I always like those episodes. We had one called the Ozark Howler early on, and I'm always fighting to get less details, I guess, of the monster, because you're going to imagine something way more terrifying than I could ever describe, really, and that's true of so much that we do on the show. When you're writing something like this, and when you're writing for sound, it has so much to do with remembering that everybody's seen a sunset, but everyone's also seen some terrible creature, that they remember from their childhood or something, so you got to give them free rein to invest this thing that you're loosely describing with all the terrible things they can imagine. So yeah, there's a real art to less is more here. And I think Nick does a great job with the sound design in terms of keeping it in the background, but really making a huge contribution to the show.
A phrase I've heard people in production talk about, especially with heavily sound designed episodes, is that occasionally the ear needs a break. And so that might come in the form of a moment of pause where there is no sound, there's no speaking, there's no music, there's no sound design. That might come in the form of a tone shift where you move from something somber to something upbeat, or that might come in the form of just, we're going to continue with just the host speaking and we're going to drop the music. I think this show kind of brings up another challenge, another need for that break, which is it is ominous. It is something is looming, and it's a little, it's scary, and there's low tones being played by the sound. And how do you bring a little levity to that? Do you have to find ways to weave in a joke or just give us a breath? Like, how do you think about that emotional pacing of it?
Oh yeah. Well, we're always trying to have fun, and we're trying to build a better mousetrap here. We're trying to take, because I found, again, just in the things I used to listen to and stuff, I found that there were really good shows with a lot of variety, but sometimes those are a bit of work to listen to because they were hit or miss and you couldn't really count on them. You couldn't keep going back to them. And then there are shows that had a degree of the formulaic to them where you just eat them like popcorn because you kind of know the arc, you know, the structure, you know how it's going to be introduced and how it's going to be built up, and then something's going to happen and then it's going to let you back out. And you can just listen to those over and over again because there's something about that pattern that just, you know, it's addictive. So what we're always trying to do is find those moments, especially early in episodes, where we have little false starts or just funny little things happen, you know, that you can kind of count on, so that, you know, like, all right, well, it's too early in the episode, nothing terrible is going to happen yet, you know, and it sort of carries you along, hopefully, in a, like you said, a way that breaks that tension up, so that when you get to, you know, a certain point within the episode, you kind of know, okay, this is probably going to be the real thing, because we've had our fun earlier on, and the whole premise is so fun anyway that we're always looking for opportunities to keep it light, and some episodes more than others, but we try not to hurt too many people in our episodes. We try to have a lot of fun. We try to, you know, try to throw some scares in there, and I think kind of break the mold too. In modern day terror and modern day horror, you know, podcasts and movies and everything, a lot of people are really going for broke when it comes to, you know, gore and violence, and we don't, not because we refuse to, but just because I feel like there's more to be mined from fear, you know, rather than just kind of cheap thrills.
Let's go to the next clip. So in this clip, the ship has now caught fire, and for the first time, you get a look at this terrifying creature they call Colossal Claude.
And I say, hold on. I say we don't hurt people, but I guess we do wipe out a whole crew of people on this ship. So there you go. What can you say?
Yeah, you're really in a godlike, omnipotent role here.
The fire on the ship has spread in spite of the rain, and by its light you see a movement in the water beside you that draws your eye. And there's the head of the creature, of Colossal Claude, rising slowly from the sea beside you. Water gushes from between the long fangs of the mouth as it slowly hinges open. You see the gills on either side of the neck, lit red by the light of the burning ship. But you can't see the eyes. The eyes are sunken so far into pits on either side of the head that the shadows hide them completely. You are helpless, and your dazed brain resigns itself to this horrible sight being your last.
That's got to be the scariest use of something named Claude ever. You know, I mean, we were really fighting the name of that creature, but man, you know, we came through scary.
Up next on Camp Monsters, Nasty Norman.
That's right, exactly.
Like, it did not lend itself, but you brought it, my friend.
That's right.
When you think about writing scripts like that, what I was struck by in that clip specifically was just establishing a sense of place. And I don't even mean the upfront moments of an episode where you're like putting me physically on the ship and in the water. It's like there's a subsection of that. It's like we're now moving to this part of the stage, so to speak. We're in the water, this has happened, and this is what I see. Considering it's about a sea monster and it's fictional, how do you like ensure you capture all the key moments? Are you like literally closing your eyes and being like, okay, so if this was to happen, then this would happen, then this would happen, then this, because it's so, you don't leave any details lacking.
Well, thank you. I think, you know, like I said, it's always that balance between throwing enough details at it, because there's a very clear picture in my mind of what's happening, but I have to also always keep in mind, and this is the challenge I think we're always faced with in these scripts, and we sometimes do a great job with it, and sometimes we struggle, where I'm trying to paint that picture, but leave you lots of room to fill in on your own. You know, I mean, I want to say, all right, this is what's happening, but you're seeing what you're seeing, you're experiencing what you're experiencing as this story goes along, and I want to leave a lot of latitude for that. So it's a balancing act, really. But yeah, I have a picture in my head of how these things are happening, and a lot of times they'll change as it's going along, as I'm writing the story and telling it to myself in my head. It'll just, something will click and it says, oh, we're in the water, obviously this is what's going to happen next, or like, oh, no spoilers, but when the mast falls and kind of saves you as the person for a while, that's the kind of thing that I wasn't necessarily sure that was going to happen until we're in the water with the creature, and then you say, oh, wait a minute, obviously that's what's going to happen, so so yeah, it's fun. That's part of the fun of this is getting a chance to sit down and hammer these things out and take the ride with the listener, and say, oh, cool, this is going to be a lot of fun.
Right. One of the things I noticed about the script, or the way it was performed anyway, was the pauses in between details, which, for a show like this does let the sound design carry the weight and be effective, I think. But even if there was no sound design in a given show, I find that with audio, like I had a friend tell me this about my public speaking once. And she was like, you speak quickly, don't slow down because you'll sound unnatural. Add pauses in between the points you're making because it lets the audience catch up. And I think moving from a stage to radio or podcasting, there's no visual. So you aren't tracking anything but the voice. And so I think it's even more crucial that the host bake in little pauses because the audience is just slightly behind what you're saying as they turn words into visuals, into meaning. That's a little nuance I love about scripting and performing a script on audio. What are some of the other things you can tell us about such a heavily written show? Because I think people listening, even if they don't script, everyone's written stuff in their lives. But I do find that it's a different kind of writing when you write just for audio.
Yeah. And it's a challenge every week in and week out in terms of the things you put on the page that are so good on the page. And then you read it and you say, oh man, we're getting bogged down here. That's what tends to happen. Or, oh man, we're actually not giving this enough. We need to, like you said, linger on this just a little bit longer so that people can kind of really get a feel for it. And that's part of the kind of rewrite and re-record process. And we don't have to do a lot of it just because, we've done this for a couple seasons now, and we're getting better and better at identifying those things as we read it and kind of read it in voice in a way, read it in your head so that you're thinking, okay, this is how it's going to sound. But there's still a lot of those moments where something that reads so good on the page, you don't want to get rid of it. And then once you record it, you think, it's not working, so there is that disconnect, and that's part of the challenge and part of the fun of coming back to this is saying like, oh yeah, just because I'm always struck by how the things that you write in the script that you really love, when you get in front of the mic and you listen back, you think, that reads great, but it doesn't do the same thing for the imagination that it does on the written page. You can read that and it takes your imagination right there. But when you listen to it, it's just not the same. So that's part of my hobby background in radio theater and kind of the old time stuff, something that they had a little more experience in, and I'm always kind of learning from them in a way about what to leave in, what to leave out, as we're making these.
I find that shorter sentences when you're scripting, because you tend to run out of breath. You're not running out of what is the breath? Visuals of what's the breath of your eyeballs? Visuals.
Yeah, there you go.
you're not running out. Like you can read a long sentence, albeit they can drag on, and that's dangerous. But there's something about performing a script that I find shorter sentences are helpful. A plainer way to describe it, like it's still vivid, but it's not as flowery as when it's written to be read. Written to be spoken. You're not going to say, I don't know what a good example would be. Like there's some English lit or, high scoring words that you probably wouldn't use
right
in a script. And, what plagues me is when I write, my style of writing sort of came up with the early blogosphere, like a lot of sports writers in particular, because I wanted to be a sports journalist, who would write very colloquial style as different from print style when they moved online. And I kind of grafted that onto my writing. And part of that was, whether it was a columnist like Bill Simmons or Rick Riley, there was a lot more parenthetical asides. And I find that those really kill momentum. If you're trying to get the listener to carry multiple points in their mind at once, forget about the comprehension is shot.
Yeah. No, and there's a pattern, and there's an art to how you have to build these things, like you said, so that you're building the general place, and then you're giving them something specific in that place that they can focus on, and then you're giving them something specific about that thing in that place. So you're and it's I liken it to like watching the old Bob Ross, the old guys that used to paint on public television, where at first you're not quite sure what's going on, but it gets more and more detailed as you drill into it, and you have to deliver all that in a certain way that, like you said, is digestible by the mind, so that somebody can lock into it and say, oh, okay, now we're in the desert. Right. Got it. I see that little bush in the desert. Okay. Well, what's weird about that, that little thing out there, and that you're taking them along for the ride. And there's an art to it. And also I'll say at this point in our process, we're not restrained by grammar anymore. We don't worry about the way that it looks on the page. We have a little shorthand that we use for some of those pauses and for the way we're going to deliver the sentences.
Like what?
Well, I mean, just the way we use dashes and sometimes slashes. We use paragraph breaks. We'll use ... to kind of indicate certain places where we're going to trail off and then resume. And we all, in the production, we all kind of know how those are going to sound. We didn't really sit down and say, okay, this is how we're going to write this. But I started writing it that way because we were delivering it that way. And now as we read it, that really helps us with some of our longer sentences, because we don't necessarily, as you're describing something, you don't necessarily stop, new subject, object, action. It's like, well, okay, it's going to be part of the previous sentence, but there's going to be this break. And here's how we're going to indicate it. So we don't write it, if you read our scripts, and I think we post them online, they have a lot of little dashes and a lot of little dots, because we're telling ourselves, okay, we're going to break this up. We're going to tell it in a certain way.
Right. I think about even just the way you introduce details, like you said, it's sort of like, we're here in this place. Stop. Do you see that bush? Stop. It's weird. Stop. And so, I might write a sentence like, I don't know, a former radio drama hobbyist and performer, Weston Davis is now the host and writer behind a show from REI, the apparel company, called Camp Monsters. I might write that and you'd read it, no problem. It'd be so smooth. Right. But saying that out loud is so convoluted, and hearing it is even worse. So a former, I might say about myself, a former sports journalist, Jay is now X, Y, and Z. But I have to say, I'm a former sports journalist. Pause. And so, but today, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. And you get better at it with time. I'm sure you listen back to your old episodes like, gosh, I'm really running on there, whereas now you understand, you've listened to yourself enough that you say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And that's the other part, is listening to yourself, because there's always that natural reaction when you listen to yourself, like, oh man, this is work, but we have to do it, and we make, I make a real effort and say, okay, we're going to sit down. I'm going to sit down with every episode that we've done and say, all right, well, this is what works and this is what didn't, and let's try to make it better next time. So you have to kind of get over that reluctance you have about I just want to make it and put it out there and forget about it. You have to sit down with it and say, okay, I'm going to live with this for a second and try to get better from it.
The analogy I'd use, just to kind of put a button on these points, is when you're writing for someone else to read it, you can kind of hand them the whole meal and they will tuck into it as they see fit. They might eat it as you expected. They might go back to other things and dance around, but here it is. I've written this, have at it. I feel like with radio and audio and podcasting, you have to hand them the meal, but then sit down next to them and start spoon feeding them a little at a time.
Or
That's
at least
the analogy I would use.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least point out the things that are going to be really good. Say, oh yeah, the mashed potatoes are nice, but hey, have you tried the steak? Cut into that. Look how that good that looks.
Right.
You got to give them you got to give it to them exactly in a certain way.
Let's go to the third and final clip. So as we proceed in the same story, miraculously, you've survived the ordeal with Claude. It's a miracle. You're alive somehow.
How anybody survives anything with Claude, I don't know. Claude,
I don't think so.
It sends shivers up my spine. Yeah.
Nobody has really live to tell a tale because, and that's why we don't really know where Claude is, right? Obviously, all these monsters. What do you
Right.
call them? Cryptids? All these cryptids?
Yeah, there you
They
go.
claim
Cryptids.
they claim they're victims, and that's why we can't find them.
There you go.
But it's a podcast, so you can do it however you want. So miraculously, you've survived the ordeal with Claude, but somehow you've ended up at a different time altogether.
Magic of podcasting. You know, we can control those things.
Let's hear the clip.
You are half carried down endless hallways made of metal, lit by fixtures you've never seen the like of. You're given hot food and drink, and a warm bunk and warm clothes when you awaken. You meet the crew, a wide mix of nationalities, which you're used to as a sailor, but most speak some English, and you find that a few of them can understand the bits of Malay you remember from your voyages in Batavia waters. They're amused by your tentative wonder at the size of their vessel, and they tell you that it's quite small for what they call a container ship. They tell you the date, and twice you ask them to repeat it. The fact that it should be October is impossible, since the Olympus that you were aboard went down in March, and you know you could never survive so long. But the thing that truly gives you pause is the year. 2021, which the crew say is 2021, and you grow quiet at that, and cautious. Something very unexpected is happening here, and you can't quite decide whether the fault is in you or the world around.
Why do you love that moment? I love the cackle there. Why do you love it?
I love it because we can do anything we want, you know, and it was our first experiment within this podcast, in this podcast world, with time travel, but I really wanted to do it, and it's just fun to be working in a medium and on a show where you say, hey, wait a minute, how about if we just travel in time? You know, it's very freeing. It's a lot of fun. And every season we try to do an episode. We did the mole episode in season 2, which is kind of about the mole people, you know, that live underneath New York. And then that one we, you know, really took the listener and said, okay, you're going to be in this story. You know, you are going to be a part of this story. And we do something similar here. And it's just so much fun. I mean, I really love listening to it. That and Batavia waters, you know, that was, that's a shout out to old Joseph Conrad there. But I love what we get to do. It's so much fun.
When you head into a script like this, do you have a sense that this is something you're going to try? Like, is the arc easier or even planned episode to episode because you know where it's heading, or are you discovering it mid-process?
Oh, definitely discovering it mid-process, especially with something like this, where we were doing something we hadn't done before, you know, in any of the seasons, where we're going to carry one character, and that character is going to be the listener, and it's going to start, you know, in the dim past, and then suddenly jump right to the present, sort of thing, you know. So, but it did make it easier because it was so fun and original, and it was let the idea carried that whole episode, you know. I mean, just wanting to get to the next thing and find out how it was going to turn out, you know, it kind of wrote itself, and it was a lot of fun to write and a lot of fun to perform.
Is there any kind of story structure or sort of like, you know, typical structure to an episode that you break from, or, you know, are you walking in with a blank page every time?
No, I do try to, like I said, I try to follow a formula, just because I think that the limits of that are actually beneficial to creativity. And also because I think that if you have a story arc that you follow, then people will tend to just let the episodes play. There's something about that familiarity that really brings you back. It keeps you coming back for more, I think. At least it's always been true of myself, because it's you know what's going to happen, you know how it's going to go. It's the mystery is in the substance, is in every episode doing it a little differently and giving you something a little bit different, taking you some different place. This one was a bit of a break, and like I said, we mix it up here and there, and we try to change things up. But usually we kind of have that sort of, we introduce our characters, where they are, what they're doing, and then things start to get strange, and then usually you'll have a little bit of a false climax, which we used to use for an ad break, but found out people didn't like that. It took them out of the story. So we dropped those ad breaks, and then we would take it on to a real climax where you have some kind of encounter with the creature or some other very strange occurrence. Then the run out, either to escape or oblivion, depending on how we feel that day.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess people are going to have to listen to this episode to understand, because we're not going to play it here. No spoilers. With the Colossal Claude episode, do you run out, you escape, or do you head to oblivion? So you'll have to listen to figure that out. What has been the reaction? What do you hear from listeners or people? Because, what I'm fascinated by is with the show is that you are taking existing source material and then telling stories. It's almost like fan fiction about these cryptids. Like in a way, there's some people that, I could imagine you have the historians and the purists, and you have the people who like telling stories like this, and you have people that just become a fan of the show, and then you have REI super fans. Like, there's a lot of passion in lots of different ways in the audience that you might be speaking to. So what's the response been?
It's been overwhelmingly positive. I don't know. You always have people that, like you said, say, well, wait a minute, this creature, it's never been documented doing this or doing that, kind of the purists who say, oh, well, I don't know whether that's really legitimate, or is that really the way it happened? But most people really just enjoy the ride, and they seem to want to have their local creatures. We've gotten some good ideas from listeners writing in and saying, like, hey, you should look up, this creature in our area. Sometimes things you'd never heard of, sometimes things that you can't even really find much mention of online, where it's just like, what, really? And then we have to do a little bit more digging and try to find more stories of these local creatures, because it's so interesting when you get down to the local folklore. There's a lot of things floating around out there that, I don't know where they come from, but there's a lot of material out there and a lot of stories to tell. And so you have such a wide variety. You're never going to please everybody, because some people have their own existing ideas of what this creature was supposed to be like and about. But most of them are willing to go on the ride with you and kind of say, well, let's accept this telling of this particular creature or this story this time, and just see where it takes us. But it's been a great reaction. We've got a really great fan base that kind of keeps coming back to it. So we appreciate that and try to keep bringing the goods for them.
In our last segment, we don't play a clip, but rather look ahead. What's something you'd like to try to reinvent the show, to keep yourself excited, to delight the audience? What's something you want to try on this show that you haven't done yet?
I want to get more into it, and we just started scratching the surface on it, but not just because we're running out of cryptids. There's still plenty of cryptids to do, but I would like to expand a little bit more into kind of hauntings and things like that, just because there's so much cool material that you can use, and so many ways you can challenge yourself in terms of presenting frightening things that aren't necessarily tied to a physical creature, more like a phenomena and things like that. And also, just from a structural standpoint, I want to keep playing with, we try to change the delivery, change the formula, change something about the way we make the show every year. And there's just a couple, little tweaks that I want to try next season and season following, in terms of trying to bring the excitement right to the viewer right away. I mean, the listener, right away, and really find a really good way early in the episode to give them a little taste, to get them queued up on what's going to happen, on the action that they're going to find out about, because we spend time sort of building up to the terror in a way, and that's great if you've if you give it the time to listen to it. But I think there's some effective ways that we can kind of let everybody know up front, hey, it's going to get scary here.
The show is Camp Monsters from REI Co-op Studios. It is incredible. I've been tracking it for probably longer than any show. This is like the longest delay between me admiring a podcast and the podcaster coming on the show. So thank you.
We're just so busy. We're so busy.
Yeah, you're running around chasing monsters and being
That's right.
chased.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wes Davis, thank you so much. This episode was produced by Stuart Barefoot, and our music was created by Tyler Litwin. My work, including my narrative podcast, Unthinkable, Stories to Inspire Creativity, can be found at jayacunzo.com. 3 Clips is a Castos original series. Castos is a software company that believes what I believe about podcasting. It's about going deeper. It's about exploring meaningful things to your audience in a way that few other forms can do. And so they provide tools for podcasters to do all the basics like host, distribute, and measure the success of your podcast. But they've also recently developed a suite of tools to help you create a private podcast. So whether you're a marketer communicating to the team internally, you're an internal comms leader, or perhaps you're a creator like I am, who's trying to build a career based on your audience and your art and your relationship to that audience, well, you can create a private podcast that helps you both drive revenue or at least build a subscription-based audience. You can learn more at castos.com. That's castos.com. All these links are in your show notes. And now, our bonus segment. Every episode, we ask our guests for a podcast they'd recommend that is not at the top of the charts, a show they want to show some love to. We call this segment Play It Forward.
Well, like I said, I don't really come from a background in podcasting. There's a million excellent podcasts that everyone should listen to. I'm just not qualified to really pick and choose, amongst them. So what I would say is go back and listen to some of the old time shows, things like the Black Museum, Orson Welles' old show, Quiet Please, Lights Out, some of those kind of shows that they really put great production quality into back in the old days and great storytelling. I know that's a little bit of a cop-out, but by God, that's what I'm going to really, really push for here, because I think there's a lot of material and a lot of great lessons to be learned from those, and they really did it right. And no one's ever going to be as good as Orson Welles. All my little pauses and things, I steal that from him, but some of these guys were just so good at what they did, guys and people. Some of these people, men and women both, delivered it so well back in the old days that it really works to kind of go back and take inspiration from that, because there's a lot there. There's a lot to be found.
All right, that's it for this episode. I'm Jay Acunzo, and I believe making meaningful work is not about who arrives. It's about who stays. So thanks so much for staying with me, and I'll talk to you this coming Monday with a brand new episode of the show. Until then, keep making what matters. See ya.